HR manager here.
Awesome, thank you so much. With that, I'll hand it over to Brad. And again, if those on Zoom, if anyone has difficulty hearing Brad, please just let us know and I can adjust the mic here a little bit. Thank you very much. Brad, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here today. So we kind of stumbled into my kind of bio a little bit in the pre-session discussion, but I do own a company called The Growth Coach. The 7 years that I've been operating in business on my own. Prior to that, worked a couple different stints in the chairs that most of you are sitting in the HR sides of things. So manufacturing and financial tech, and then some mid-market consulting along the way. And so I've had some experience in kind of most of the places where you're sitting right now. In my current business today, what we do is we help businesses grow kind of in one of three ways. We work with owners, managers, executives, or frontline leaders and help them just figure out how do they get more done and how do they build their capacity to be able to be more effective with what they do. We help them from a process standpoint, try to put some process things in place so that they can delegate and use the talent around them a little bit more effectively. And then for some of the smaller businesses I work with, I help them on the sales side of things and just trying to figure out how to become a salesperson once they were an entrepreneur and help them kind of grow and evolve their business. With all of that work, I also do some HR consulting kind of on the side with things with some of my clients too, and act as a separate pair of hands beyond the training and development work that I do with them. And one of the interesting kind of topics that I think we're all facing right now is labor and being able to access it. And what I wanted to do was to talk today, but from a little bit of a different angle on that. And really talk about how do we keep the people that you have right now, and specifically the ones that are the most important to you. I can tell you, and going out and talking with different businesses and whatnot, maybe you've all felt this, the poachers are out and about, right? They're all digging at each other's, workforce. The workforce is what it is kind of right now. And so for me, and what I've been having success with my clients is really helping them understand that I have to keep the ones that I really like and the ones that are really making things happen for my business. Because if I'm spending a lot of time, effort, and energy trying to find that other pool out there, it may not be out there in ways that we think it is. And so what I wanted to do today was show you some data that is kind of speaking to that a little bit. And if we look at the labor trends, the news is not good in terms of what the workforce looks like. As you guys have been doing your thing, what are some of the reasons or excuses you've heard as to why there's not workforce now that maybe was there previously? What are some of the common things that are popping up that you hear? Pay? Okay, so there are people who are paying more?
Offering more flexibility.
Said more flexibility? Anything in terms of like why there's less people that you hear people talk about?
Right now,
Yeah.
with the pandemic and the unemployment and all the free money and trying to get them back to work. That's what
Okay. Yeah, and so I hear a lot of that too. And the scary thing I'm about to show you in the data is that they may not be out there. They may already be in a lot of cases. And we'll talk about what that data looks like. So not to like make you lose your appetite, but but there's some data that suggests that maybe they are already doing some things for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about. So then that gets to how do we keep the folks that we have. And so I've got 5 things that I've found to be effective that have been really about how do I really dig in and invest and keep the folks that I've got and really try to keep them kind of tied in with our organization, which is trying to face reality around kind of where we're at. And that's where we're going to start our discussion today here in a second. Being able to strengthen your relationship with your direct supervisors. We'll talk a little bit about the value of trying to find other ways to add value for employees as part about being connected with you all. We'll talk a little bit about how to put together what a path for growth looks like and be able to market that to your folks. Because unfortunately, you recruited them, and I think we're entering an era where we're going to have to continue to re-recruit and to continue to re-engage our folks to convince them that we're the right place to be. And then I think one of you mentioned already flexibility. That's what I'm really seeing right now, even more than pay. In a lot of cases, it's flexibility that a lot of people are really after right now. And so with that then, I would like to depress you with some labor trends. So from some recent SHRM article with some Bureau of Labor statistics here, labor force participation rates projected to continue to trend down to 60.4% in 2030. We're at 61.7% right now. And what that's going on there is you got retiring baby boomers, and you've probably heard about the great retirement. I don't know what you're all seeing, but in work businesses that I'm working with right now, if somebody has an option and to financially swing it, they're jumping out right now. And most of the time it has nothing to do with you. Whether COVID made them decide they're reevaluating their priorities, maybe they're just sick of dealing with people, maybe it's masks, vaccination, whatever they're doing right now. If they've got choices, they're exercising those choices, which is bad news for all of us here. And so that trend is continuing and actually picking up steam a little bit. So the great retirement hype that I think we hear talking about, at least for me, I see a lot of evidence of that. Employment rates of younger age groups have been steadily declining over the past couple of decades and are projected to continue to do so. So what we have here is, we just talked a little about how with some of the middle schoolers, I think you were saying, like, they don't even know, like, what do I want to be when I grow up, or even have a couple of ideas or thoughts related to that, right? And I think that correlates to a lot of things that I have seen back in my HR days when I was running co-op programs and things like that. And it amazed me 5, 6, even 7 years ago when I would sit down with a really strong mechanical engineering candidate, and I'd sit down with him and I'd be like, hey, well, let's take a look at your resume at like a job fair or something. And the first thing I see there in work experience is philanthropy chair for my fraternity, or babysat my aunt or uncle, right? For my aunt and uncle, my cousins. Kids are not working as teenagers right now. And wherever that comes from or whyever that is, I can just tell you that doesn't happen as much, right? You know, I can go all back in my day on you and talk about all the jobs that I had between, like, say 13 and 21. And I see some nods here. So some of you kind of lived that similar life. That's really not what kids are doing right now. You know, I've got, just in my own particular case, I have a 20-year-old, he's been in 3 jobs, but that's abnormal. When I started kind of nudging him to work at a golf course at 14, parents around me were like, why are you making him work so young? And there was kind of some of that inherent pressure. At least for him, it was, he wanted to be a high school golfer, and I wasn't paying for it. So he had to find somewhere to go play, right? But, you know, what I find more and more is having 3 teenagers, at least for me, my observational piece of that is that part's not changing. And that where kids, there's a small percentage of kids that are working, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. And if they're delaying work as teenagers, then that same thing's happening up and through those early 20 years as well. And the data is bearing that self out. And so when we talk about that younger part of the workforce not being there, it's smaller, and it continues to get smaller. And then what I think is personally happening and I'm seeing is that those folks that are in that workforce, they're already knee deep in organizations right now. There's not a lot of market for those folks that want to work, because you guys have all done a great job of finding them and soaking them into your organizations and trying to make a part of what you're doing. So if I can depress you a little bit more, the participation rate of prime age population, 25 to 54, has been slowly trending, but is expected to actually remain flat. So hopefully a little bit of better news, but the age group that most of us in this conversation are in, it's actually been trending down from our own participation as well. Anecdotally, I see more of that happening from a COVID perspective. Had a similar discussion a couple of weeks ago with some employers that were talking about a lot of people that they knew that were 2-income families that have chosen to become 1-income families, or maybe 1.5, based on some other gig opportunities and things like that are happening around. And so I think that is impacting us as well from a negative standpoint of things. A positive is that we're projected to continue to increase and produce jobs in the United States. And so that's a positive in one way, but it's actually a negative for all of us. Because, right? Because as more and more jobs are popping up, and we just talk about how that pool continues to shrink more and more, it's going to become even harder, right? And so, not to say that we're going to abandon our recruiting efforts and the things to try to get people on board, but I think the data is telling us that it's going to become more and more and more important to keep the ones we've got right now, because it's going to get harder and harder and harder to find new ones to come into our organizations. So as I throw that data up there, I guess any observations or thoughts, either online or here in the room, that does that kind of ring true with some things that you're seeing, or surprising? I'm just kind of curious your reaction to that data. Or just make you all want to resign?
We'll get robots. We'll get robots.
Yeah, I hear that too, right? The whole robot thing.
We'll be there every day.
The safety aspect is hiring 3 more people to be safe around the robots. We have them at work.
And that's what I've seen in that robot space, is that maybe there's a day where the robots will take over the world, but there's gonna have to be maintenance robots that figure out how to maintain robots and position robots and program robots to make that happen. And I think we're a ways away from that. So even in places where I'm seeing robotics occur, the demand is there, but the demand's different now. I mean, how many of you are looking for multi-craft maintenance people in one form or another? Probably everybody in here in one piece, right? And people that have experience with pneumatics and hydraulics and maybe some PLC programming and things like that. And those people can almost write their ticket right now as well, right? Okay. So the other labor trend, I'm dating myself with my movie references here, so I apologize if you're not on board, but if you are on board, the 70s and 80s and 90s were a great time to grow up. More position from a 9-to-5 space, the 8-hour shift is going away. And that there's more of a sense that that's outdated. And I think there's more of a sense and an expectation in the labor market that that's outdated as well. For some businesses, that can be a good thing based on how you're structured. For others of us, that becomes a bit of a challenge. And how do we deal with that notion that 9 to 5, 5 days a week isn't necessarily kind of the way things are anymore? And people have differing expectations for what they want out of a working experience. And it may not necessarily be best set up for maybe some of the production work or some of the schedules or the customer service things that we need to be able to do. So just one more piece of data to depress you here a little bit. So again, I think all that goes and speaks to, okay, what do we do with the folks that we have right now? And how do I go back and really invest and make sure that the folks that I've got are the ones that are going to stick with me? Because the other thing that I have found to be true is that most of the time, some of our best recruiters are our best employees. And the personal connections that they have and their willingness to talk about just what a good place it is to work and the positive experience can even help us from a recruiting standpoint. So first thing I wanted to do, and the first thing I think we need to be able to do, especially as HR professionals, is we got to start thinking a little bit like Red, right? From Shawshank, right? And, you know, if you remember this scene, right, he talks about you either get busy living or get busy dying. Now, it's not that bad, what we're facing, right? But I think the reality that we have to address and get everybody to address is that we can dream about the workforce that we want, but we got to deal with the one we've got. And as soon as we're willing to kind of embrace that and figure that out, and the folks that I see that are trying to do that, they tend to be making a little bit more progress right now instead of being laid back and stuck on how things used to be, how we've always structured things, how we've always set up things with our employee, everything from compensation to schedule and kind of all points in between. So I'm not saying you have to go out and break your models, so to speak, but I think this is a time to really reflect on those models and really reflect on the things that are positive about your work experience and the things that differentiate you and the things that are maybe opportunities for you to approach from a people standpoint to make your place a place where people want to stay and a place where they want to tell their friends about to come and be able to join you along the way. And so what I wanted to do is just give you kind of to think about kind of the normal SWAT process. And I want you to just think about swatting yourself, so to speak, here for a couple minutes, to give you a couple minutes where nobody's like demanding your time and energy and the phone's not ringing. But think about yourselves as an employer and your organization. And I'd like to just give you maybe 5 minutes or so to just jot down some things. What are your strengths as an employer? What do you have that make you a great employer? Somebody that is attractive to people? What are some of those weaknesses? Maybe some of those things you could get better at to be the type of place where people want to stay and want to continue to grow their careers. opportunity wise, what are some of those things you've thought about, but maybe you just haven't been able to take action on that you could see being able to benefit you? And just some of those threats and some of those things that maybe worry you and keep you up at night about your ability to keep some of your best folks. I'll give you a few minutes to just kind of write and reflect in those areas. Cool. So I'm not going to ask you like to bare your soul and talk about all the things you're struggling with or your weaknesses or challenges, but the one I'm most particularly curious about box-wise are the opportunities. What are some of those things that you see as improvement steps that you could make to try to make your employment experience for your employees more attractive, to make them want to continue to stay and stick with you? What are some of those things that you just want to take a swing at, but maybe you quite haven't had a chance to do yet?
I'd like to look at part-time work opportunities.
Okay.
I know there's companies that have some success, manufacturing companies success in opening up part-time work.
I have a client that we created the video game shift. The shift specifically built for gamers. It starts at 1, it ends at 6.
Yeah.
You can wake up at noon, you can go home and grab a bite and go video game yourself until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. But somebody's still got to pay for those Xbox credits. So you probably ought to come in and work through the afternoon and help us through one of our busier times. It's actually gotten some traction for them. They're downtown, not downtown, south side of Columbus. Some Capital kids, some other kids that are just kind of in between where they're at. It's kind of helped them ramp up a little bit. We affectionately dubbed it the video game shift. What else are you thinking about?
Maybe a short shift that would allow moms to take more.
That was the other thing that the video game shift inadvertently did, is it actually attracted some more moms to their organization that they were okay in the evening, like when kids came home and they just needed to stay home maybe for an hour or two by themselves, or maybe somebody could keep an eye on them, but getting out the door in the morning was the biggest issue. So their 7:30 shift start time was just a no-go.
Yeah, we have a 7 a.m. start time. And then it's just evenings, and moms cannot work overnight. Very easy.
Yeah, so I asked them some creative some things with part-time and some different start times to get more people in. It's not the best solution, right? We'd love everybody to be there, those standard shift times and everything, but I think that's part of the adjustment we all have to be able to try to figure out. Anything else come to mind that you're looking at that you're hoping maybe could have some positive impacts for you?
In our next newsletter, I'm going to do a highlight on growth within our organization and how our vice president of operations started as a batch operator. I think we have a lot of new employees on the floor that aren't aware that the majority of our office holders started as batch operators.
Okay.
Because they weren't a part of that process when everybody was getting promoted. So I think that we can highlight that and have them keep in mind that they can, also get there.
Great.
You condense that for the Zoom.
Yeah, so if y'all couldn't hear that, the discussion was around trying to highlight how some of the leadership and folks in positions actually started in the production environment, and try to, at least in their newsletter, highlight the growth path and how there are different leaders that started kind of at the bottom, so to speak, and have worked their way or in the process of working their way closer to the top. Good. These are the kinds of things I think that we struggle getting to sometimes because we just get so frustrated and bogged down in what we don't have and what's not there. And so I think it's important every now and then where you use a SWAT tool or use just something else to just give yourself a framework to rethink kind of where things are. I think as HR folks, we have to constantly be able to do that for our businesses, because at least it's always been my experience, we're the ones that's driving change most of the time from a people standpoint of things, right? We may be asked to create things to meet schedules or meet business demands, but ultimately it's us that are trying to drive that change in one form or another and being able to adopt it. So I think being the voice of opportunity versus the voice of no and we can't do this or we can't do that. But having some of those other solutions in our back pocket are really important right now to find some creative ways to help our organizations grow. The other thing that I would suggest, and kind of sort of step two, is trying to add value in other ways. And so I've seen some really creative things from employers that are doing things to add value for their employees in other ways beyond just giving them additional money in the bank or dollars per hour or cents per hour. And so, for instance, I have a landscaper that I've worked with that realized he had some folks on his team that just were clueless financially. Really didn't know about managing a checking account, let alone balancing one, right? So he actually takes time and runs personal finance classes for his team and encourages them to come in and sit down kind of on their own time, but takes a vested interest sort of in where they're heading personally and financially, and kind of gives them some, for lack of a better term, some amateur financial consulting on things, and to help them just kind of get themselves steadied and build some life skills that maybe just didn't get to them in one form or another. So I'm seeing creative solutions like that. At a very bigger scale, I've seen some organizations and read about organizations that are doing things like home purchase programs that are working with people to help them try to save money and do different things to help them from a lodging standpoint and a housing standpoint. I've been a part of and have seen other certification and educational programs and trying to build people in. Then you see a couple of those other ideas up there in terms of connecting with your partners and trying to provide just additional, whether it's discounts or service opportunities through affiliations. And so this is one of those ways that I think is pretty easy a lot of times for us, in that there's probably a lot of people that would like to partner with us and be able to connect with us. It's hard in that we're trying to get everything else done on a regular basis. But sometimes these additional value pieces that can come into play are really important things and can be even life-changing things for some of our employees. And if they can tie that connection to that life-changing experience, that education, that information related to kind of their financial planning or whatnot, it really helps them ingrain their loyalty to us because we're the ones that made that opportunity available to them. We're the ones that provided these things. And so those things can be important as well. And notice I have meals up here. So whether that's part of the chamber strategy of more events to feed the chamber employees or not, but I even see those things as well. And I see a lot of businesses doing a lot of that now, a lot of internal catering or bringing in meals and a lot of opportunities as a reward, but also as an opportunity to try to save, I think, people actually leaving their property sometimes so they can kind of get back to work a little bit more quickly. Yeah, Matt.
I just interject here that that's a good point about partnering with other affiliations, and that would include chamber membership. For instance, any one of your employees, if you're a chamber member, automatically gets up to 80% off of paint at Sherwin-Williams, for instance, for their own home projects. And I hope that the businesses see some of the things that we have on this big long list, which every employee that they have under them is eligible for, see that as a kind of a perk of employment at a chamber member. It's use them in their own home projects, or they can get half off banners for their high school kids' high school graduation, things like that.
Now, that's a great point, right? And all that really takes is just some time for us to message that, right? And to be able to put those things together. But those are real cost savings and real benefits to people that they can have just through their affiliation with us and our organization. I appreciate you mentioning that. Because I know I see those every now and then as they just kind of pop up with their email notifications, right? Like, hey, chamber members get this or what have you. But I hadn't really thought about it. Package that as sort of a perk or a benefit based on chamber membership for a particular client. That makes a lot of sense.
And those are just the short term. We have annual anytime benefits that are on a separate section that's just for like just take advantage at any point. You're right, versus the exclusive offers that are like limited sort of deals as well. Yeah,
that's a great point. So I mean, there's just one example there that Matt's talking about where these things are kind of all around us. And we just need to be able to take advantage of them and be able to talk them up. And again, you never know what that little thing can be that locks somebody in or ties somebody in or makes them feel more ingrained to who we are and what we're doing by how we're being able to help them out. Number 3 for me is strengthening relationships with supervisors. And so still undefeated The reason why people leave an organization, the top reason, is a negative relationship with their direct supervisor. So pay is important, don't get me wrong, right? Some of the other opportunities and things like that, but still the number one driver is, do I like the person that I'm working for? Do I have a good relationship with them? And typically that means, do I enjoy coming to work? Because even in the darkest times and when we're on overtime for the 114th consecutive week, if I feel good about who I'm doing it with and I feel good about who's leading me and I trust them, I'm going to feel better about where I'm at inside our organization. And so for me, I think this is a really crucial one. And so how do we make sure we're working with our supervisors and making sure that even though we're pressing them, and there's a lot of things going on for them, there's a lot of responsibilities for them. And I'm guessing most of you have to use them as production workers in addition to supervisors as well. And they're fighting that challenging battle. How do we still remind them the importance of being able to appreciate what folks are doing, right? And being able to make sure that people feel appreciated for the efforts that they're putting in with things, that they're trying to find ways to develop those skills and abilities, right? You know, those folks that seek it that are now in higher level leadership positions, somebody as a supervisor at some point saw them and said, hey, you've got some potential and I want to help you, whether it's figure out how to make this particular batch on up to who knows what, did some things to help get those people get on a path to make that ascension from a leadership standpoint. That's how are we connecting with people personally? Are we just taking the time to ask people how they're doing, how their kids are doing, how the softball game went last night, right? These things here are rocket science, but they're really easy to fall off and stop doing when you're slammed all the time and you're overwhelmed and you're trying to make sure things are happening. But if we do these things, that discretionary effort typically rises and increases with the folks that are working with us. The level of connection to the organization continues to rise and work the level with us. And when somebody's friend says, hey, across the street, we can get another $1 an hour. These are the types of things that make people go, I could go over there, but like, do I really want that headache? You know what I mean? I like where I'm at. I like who I'm working for. And what I find a lot of times is when people talk about leaving and pay is the discussion, pay is the safe reason to tell you why they left. And it's usually something else going on somewhere related to this and something we can fix right here. So it's not the panacea to everything. Some people just make decisions on the money sometimes, but I find most people would rather be comfortable in working in a group and a team that they like. And that starts with that supervisor. And so making sure our supervisors are doing those things. But then by the same token, if you're like a lot of businesses I've worked with, that supervisor was the best technician or the best person at a particular job. And that's why we bumped them up to become that supervisor. And so for all those things that we just talked about there, we got to make sure that we've got a way to develop that skill set in those folks. And they have to understand that those things are important. And even when they do them naturally, you know, maybe you've got some just natural relationship builders as supervisors that do that really effectively. Nobody's ever told them the importance of those things. It's really important to remind them of those things right now, because those are the things that, like I said before, start to slip away because I'm really busy, because I got to get this order out the door, because this came in hot, because we're missing these things. So I just forget to go do those things. So we have to really remind those folks of just how important these things are and make sure we've got the skills and the resources and the processes in place so that they can do those things as effectively, as efficiently as possible. And so I think out of all of these, there's a lot of good things here, but for me, this is the one most near and dear to my heart, because as the world has continued to change, this is to me is the one constant. If I like who I'm working for and I trust who I'm working for, it's so much harder for me to want to step up and find another place to go and find another place to work on a regular basis. So let's make sure that we're encouraging those behaviors out of our supervisors, but also supporting them and their ability to figure out how to be able to execute in those ways too. And this is one we've already talked about. It's come up a couple different times, but I think being able to market a path for growth for people is huge. And when I say market, I'm intentional in that word, because we really have to continue to market and sell the power and the benefit of working for our company right now. So kind of going back to those strengths and those opportunities that we talked about earlier, and then thinking about the things that, what makes us different? Why are we better to be somewhere else than, or why are we better to be here than somewhere else? Thinking about who we're competing with directly. Thinking about who we're indirectly competing with. And I appreciate some of you that gave the answers around opportunities, because at the end of the day, you're all competing with each other indirectly and maybe directly in some cases, right? But we're all trying to figure out answers to these problems and these challenges. And so what I think is super important for us right now is to take the mindset that we're continually recruiting, that we're continually marketing, not just the current job that people are in, but those growth opportunities as well. And for me, that really comes down to, how do I spell it out for people? How do I give them some sort of visual representation, something they can visualize of, I started here and I can end up here. Newsletters are a great place to start doing that. How do you incorporate those things in everything that you're doing? How do you incorporate that into those discussions of, here's why you're on this job assignment right now. You're in this job assignment because we want to see, can you step up to this particular level? Or we want you to learn this new skill because it's going to put you in a better position to be able to make more money, get a different job title, whatever your particular career aspirations might be. We've got to really make it 100% clear that there is opportunity where they're at, and there's opportunity for them to continue to grow in a way that fits for them. And the only way that's going to happen is if folks like us make that an intentional conversation and a discussion inside of our organizations. So as a pain in the butt it was to recruit them and market them to get them in the door, I think we need to continue to reinvest and refocus that effort to remind them why this is a great place to be and help them continue to see why they want to continue with us, because now more than ever, the choices are there. There's all kinds of reasons why people can make that step. Let's keep continuing to kind of remarket and resell those opportunities and why we're the right place for them to be. Don't leave it to a friend, a coworker, some family member to make that argument for you. Then the last thing that I think we can look at is that focus on flexibility. So we talked about a couple of these things already, but with flexible scheduling, another big thing that I've seen is weekly pay and people going from bi-weekly to weekly. You may not be able to do more things from a pay standpoint, but if people can get money in their hands faster, they are much more likely to feel less financially strained than having to wait every couple of weeks. And I know that sounds foreign for a lot of folks, but that's how folks are living, especially younger right now. There's a variety of reasons for that. Some of them structural, related to, maybe personal finance choices and decisions. This has also never been a time where it costs more to live where we live right now and things of that nature too. And when we think about some of those escalating costs and other aspects of life, those all play in an impact of a feeling of, am I financially secure with the work that I'm doing? And so I'm finding some success with folks and finding ways to get money from people, from their work into their hands faster. And that can become a differentiator for wanting to stay. We talked about part-time versus full-time and how we've traditionally been full-time organizations, and that flexibility and part-time. If you can start to think about some of those things, I think it opens up the door for you for some more capacity in some ways, if that's something that you could look at. The other thing that I'm seeing is less of a desire for longer term benefits like retirement 401k matches and things like that. And people would rather have kind of cash in hand and maybe a little bit more in their paycheck up front, especially the younger they are, rather than wanting to have some of those retirement resources. And so that could be another way that you can think about things in terms of those aspects of things, as well as even if your benefit plans, if you have some opportunity to do some things that are a little more cafeteria style, where people can opt to put some more cash in their pocket, but maybe still have some of those benefit opportunities. I'm seeing some success with that. And then the last one there for me, what I'm seeing is that freedom and family connections are really very important for that segment of the workforce that we're wondering, why didn't they come back, right? And so a lot of what we talk about right now are just that small pool, but then there's that other group that they haven't gone back for a few reasons. But what I'm seeing is whether it's the mom that wants to be available in the morning, whether it is the the teenager that wants to be able to video game and not have work get in the way of it, or whatever the case might be. Those types of non-extrinsic things, the less material things, aren't as important maybe as they used to be for some. And so trying to find ways that we can emphasize either that availability for family or hobbies or other aspects of life, I think can be really important and a differentiator for us if we can find ways to plan for that from a workforce standpoint, to drive a little bit more loyalty and attention from our current staff members. So those are 5 things that I'm seeing going on right now that are having some positive impact in various forms with different organizations. I guess I'll just kind of hit the pause button here for a moment, see if you have any comments or observations or questions that you'd like to share with the group.
I had a discussion this morning with one of my coworkers, and she wanted to know, do we think that people have not returned to the workforce, or have they returned to jobs that aren't posted? So we're not seeing them become Uber drivers. We're not seeing them get a TikTok or YouTube or something that they're making enough money, but they aren't work.
Yeah.
So are they working? Is their side hustle becoming their only means? And so it's not that they haven't returned to the workforce, they just haven't returned to us.
It's interesting you said that. I was in a conversation with a friend of mine last week, and he was talking about his 26-year-old daughter who her goal in life was to be a yoga instructor. And while that's awesome from what I understand from talking with him, that's not the most lucrative career choice one can make, right? And so one of her gigs and side hustles is that she goes around to thrift stores, buys up pieces of clothing that she sees as having value. There's I forget the name of the software tool where you basically go out. What's that? That wasn't the one, but I'm sure there's a handful of them, right? Where I can go out and take basically and resell what I've found in thrift stores. And he told me that she's gross $1,000 a week doing that, right? And so,
My daughter's friend does it on Instagram.
yeah. And so to your point, right? Like, well, that's what we talked about is we're having this labor shortage. Like Meredith, his daughter, she was maybe 1 or 2 part-time waitressing gigs that doesn't exist right now because she's reselling stuff she found through thrift stores. And so I do think that that's happening to a certain extent, that people are perceived to be underemployed based on our measurement process, that aren't necessarily underemployed or have some other opportunities from a gig standpoint.
I think COVID forced a lot of people to get creative.
I think that happened, and then somebody that we were talking to, actually it might have been last week when we were having our entrepreneurs council meeting, we talked a little bit with there about how, the current younger generation, like that's kind of how things were for them. Like they came out ready for the job market that wasn't ready for them. And so they had to figure out, how do I survive doing 2 or 3 different things? And part of that maybe created some freedom and some flexibility for them that makes them look at, a shift job, so to speak, or something like that, maybe a little less favorably when they can continue to do some of those things and a little more flexible and flavor towards that. But I think the challenge is nobody really has that data, right? Nobody can really say, oh, and here's the 2% of the right. Here's the 2% of the workforce that's gone away. I have an uncle too. I mean, he retired early from a sales job, and he would be a guy that, he'd probably be at a golf course, you know what I mean? Maybe cutting grass for them or doing something like that. Now he's Ubering drunk people around Syracuse and having a gay old time, kind of living his bar life again without having to drink.
So
A little too much information about my family.
So we can see that golf course opening is there.
Mm-hmm.
We can't see that a job was filled with Uber.
Right.
So
I think that does play into it to some degree. To what extent, I don't know, but I think that is another challenge and issue with people in quote unquote the workforce.
I just put myself back and think if my children were younger, if it was 15 years ago when this happened, we would have gotten out of the one family. Maybe go to school, I would have maybe stay home by themselves and do like I would have stayed home with them. And I'd be like, well, If I can stay home, I'm staying home, so.
And that's where I think, I don't personally see the unemployment side of thing as being as much of a problem for us trying to hire folks. But that's where I do think some of the stimulus stuff has facilitated some of those things, right? And if you think about how people determine what their wealth is, right? If you've saved any money and you've been in the stock market, no matter how ugly ever other things have been, that thing just keeps doing this, right? So perceptually, I can tell myself a lot of things about my financial position, based on what my IRA or my 401k might look like, that can tell me, hey, you know what, we can keep kind of bootstrapping our way through being one income, or me being one income and reselling some stuff that I'm finding in thrift stores or whatever that looks like.
I'll go through some other examples of how you continue to market and sell your staff as to why they should stay with you. We mentioned newsletters, but is there any other examples?
I think the biggest thing for me goes back to those frontline supervisors, right? And I think we miss opportunities to give them direct messages to deliver just formally or informally. And so, a good example is, all of the benefits the chamber has to offer, right? If we created a master list of all the savings and benefits you get by working here, because you're a chamber member, but I'm not going to market it as this is a chamber, right? This is because we're us, right? But if I get my supervisors together and hand them those flyers and say, hey, take 2 minutes in your next huddle, just pass these out, remind everybody, these are all the savings and benefits they get as part of being an employee here, right? For me, those are real simple, quick win things that maybe that employee will use it, maybe they won't use it, but we just told them there's a financial benefit for you being an employee here beyond just what we're paying. I think being able to really highlight and talk about the internal promotion and growth that you're doing and not making, I don't know, I feel like sometimes as HR people, we get so busy that those outcomes are maybe a little more secretive than they could be publicized, and celebrate some of those things. And maybe using things like your newsletter space or some other communication vehicles to talk about.
There's some other things going on there that I wish were a little more public that I think would be. Is happy to hear that it is coming. So I don't know. We're being so hush hush about it because I'm using it there. There is going to be.
Yeah, I think talking about the good performance of your organization. We're a stable company. We're growing. We're making things happen. I think being able to, I'm sure you're all doing some sort of employee referral program and some sort, or at least considering it. Even giving them like a little bit of a card, like, hey, here's the talking points that are the best things why people say why they like to come to work here. Oh, by the way, while you're looking at that, guess what I'm doing to you? I'm reminding you of the best reasons to stay and work here, right? And so I think there's a lot of those things that we can do subtly. They take a little time, don't get me wrong. I don't want to act like, I know most of you are bored and don't have anything else to do and are looking for more to do, but I think those are just a few examples off the top of my head about how to just continue to talk those things up as victories or as those opportunities that remind people of the positives about why they chose you and what they can receive by continuing to choose you.
Does anyone here currently have an employee referral program?
I had a $2,000 bonus for hourly, $4,000 for salary.
But think about that for a second, right? If you were selling a product, right? You wouldn't just tell your salespeople, hey, here's a $2,000 commission, here's a $4,000 commission. Good luck, go get them. Right? You would tell them, this is what our target market is. Here's the sales points I want you to be able to communicate, right? Like you would feed those folks a little bit more. And I think, just using that example, right, of just having that more of that sales and marketing mentality around, hey, not only do I want you to go look for those folks, but I want to give you a little bit of a profile. Like here's where you might look for some of those folks. Here's some of the questions you might ask them. And I think some of those things can be helpful because I think sometimes when we ask for those referrals, people think that sounds good. And then what I find is we get one of two things, right? We get the one person that refers everyone and their grandmother. and literally their grandmother sometimes, right? Now you're sorting through some things, which actually probably sounds pretty good at a moment like right now, right? And then there's other folks that are like, I don't know if that's the right fit, or I don't know if that's the right fit. And I think people tend to not ask more because they're not sure it's going to be a right fit necessarily. And so do some things to remind them about what a right fit is. I think it also reminds them that they're in a right place because they're a right fit for what we're doing.
I can say that, they don't.
Oh, I pay them out a lot.
Yeah.
I have one employee, she brings me her resume, schedule. She's had so many great referrals. Yeah, and something. We actually have quite a bit.
It's many hours, it's so long before you get the
90 days and 6 months.
But Tom, even in your case, where maybe you're not getting it, right? Just the fact that you're talking it up,
Right.
right? And just the fact that you're talking about, here's the good reasons to work here.
Well, I know a lot when we started offering, we increased our sign.
But they are
Then our-
2,000.
Okay.
Our current employees were like, what about us? Through everything.
Yeah.
And you didn't miss a paycheck, you didn't miss benefits, you all bonus. Not one extra money, so you're funding when you're working.
Because they get money too.
Yeah, yeah. Both the employee and the referral. So, but that's been our biggest challenge too is, you know, we have this referral program, the sign on bonus, so it's kind of.
Mhm.
Trying to let that happen.
And that might be an opportunity to say, well, here's the other things we have provided for you, right? You know, you haven't paid for a meal in 2 weeks, you know what I mean? Or, you know, just some of those other things that it's like those years, you know, it's true that you were here and maybe you didn't get a huge increase, but these things are also true
Oh,
too.
they quickly forget.
Mhm. But who's gonna remind them if we don't?
We've got them every Wednesday.
Yeah.
We don't cater box meals, but. But I can say I have had a lot of employees, some of you, they're looking elsewhere and they're talking about the position. That community to say, which is good. It is definitely one of the perks that I hear from our employees. And a lot of them, they shop for it. That's a big thing. Which is our budget.
Yeah, I don't have firsthand experience, but I had a company tell me they were approached by a vendor that actually will do almost an advance on your pay based on, like this company will come in and take on the risk, basically. Yeah, I know, it's nuts, right? I don't know what the cost is, right? And it sounded a little too payday lenderish to me that it was like, I don't know if I want to go there, but you know, I noticed the other day too, I think it was Huntington Bank was promoting, they'll advance you basically, I think up to 2 days.
Some of my guys have an account that we get paid on and stuff.
Yeah,
You don't know how much business that's happened.
yeah. But I think that just speaks to what you're,
Because I wasn't getting paid until Friday on a normal day. Nothing. So we don't do stuff.
and that's a huge deal for a lot of people. And I think it's one of those things we don't typically think about, but that was really kind of the affirmation for me is when I saw the banks starting to try to offer those things. You know what I mean? It used to be, okay, well, you know what, go ahead and debit yourself and we'll go ahead and forgive you basically that NSF. And now it's like completely to, why not just give it to you in advance? And then I'll NSF and fee the heck out of you if you got fired and didn't tell me or whatever. Or however that works, I don't know.
Well, they see it coming in.
Is that how
See
they
the
do it?
wire coming in.
Okay,
And so instead of waiting for the funding to come through, they fund it. So they're repaid.
okay.
So that's, I mean, they're not.
They're not really
They're not
incurring a
losing
whole lot of
any
risk
money,
there.
no.
I know we're kind of up against it time wise. Anything else kind of question wise or thought wise you want to kind of bounce off of me while we've got us together? All right. Last thing I just kind of highlight to you, second to last slide there, I got a little bit of an offer. So I do a lot of behavior assessment work in terms of trying to pick right fits for culture and things of that nature, and maybe help you ask some more effective interview questions. If you wanted to do this for your leaders as well and help them kind of boost their communication skill capability, there's a free assessment link out there. You can book some time with me to kind of talk through the results or just take the data and run with it. So that's out there for you. I appreciate you all taking some time, and that opportunity is out there for you. You can just use that link that's right there in the presentation. But that is to say thank you for your time and your attention. And you got one of the hardest jobs that is around right now. And stick with it. And I think trying to be that voice of opportunity versus the voice that has to say no is probably one of the best things we can bring to the table right now in the HR field.
Brad, thank you so much again. And before we all leave, a reminder, it is not too late. If you are interested, we do have our upcoming tomorrow, our regional Chamber of Business Expo with the Delaware Chamber at All Occasions Catering in Waldo. It's again tomorrow at 4:30 to 6:30.
Yeah.
Out there. You guys should know that. We can always get you in. You can even just walk in there. Free food, beer, wine, and some good networking. So if you can make it, we'd love to see you there. If not, otherwise, we'll see everyone hopefully next month for the next HR Council meeting. Thank you so much, and thank you again to Brad. Thank you.